Hello everyone, I'm Afaf Kanja and welcome to South News. We're very honored to have joining us the permanent representative of Finland to the United Nations, Ambassador Jarmo Viinanen. Thank you for joining us for South News.
It's a pleasure to be here.
What a pleasure to meet you in person. I haven't had the honor in the past, so thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Finland is quite the exemplary country when it comes to economic status, really self-sufficiency. What can you tell us? Because best practices are truly an important message from South News to other countries in terms of South-South cooperation and triangular cooperation. What can you tell us from the top that has had Finland really become a true economic power, even considering the economic and financial crisis?
There are, of course, several reasons for that, but one has to go a little bit back in the history to see the key issue is education. I mean, we know this long time ago that the main resource we have in the country is the human beings. So we have been educating the whole of the population since early 20th century and even on the 19th century. So that's the basis that you can have a functioning economy where you can actually compete with other countries. Then, for example, in the 80s, 1980s and 90s, a major issue was that we liberalized several of the sectors. For example, in the telecommunications, especially in the cell phone communications. That led to a lot of new innovations on services, but also on the gadgets. So that made a difference.
So let me ask you then, if you don't mind expanding for us, information communication technology, you've mentioned cell phones. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, on any kind of investments or any kind of opportunities that are sort of incoming and outcoming from Finland when it comes to building fiber optic networks and of course just in the communications industry in general to build the economy?
That's once again very, very challenging question altogether. You know, I mean, the thing is in Finland that we are very ready to adapt to new technologies. We are easily taken into use new technologies, which always increase the productivity, and we have been able to do this for many decades right now. But of course, it's a challenge. I mean, you can be a leader on a certain sector, as we've been, for example, in the cellular communications. But of course, the competition is getting harder and harder all the time. So the issue is, how can you compete when you have been a leader, but now you are challenged with other companies and so on, what to do there. So this is the challenge we are facing right now.
Sure, and that maybe comes back to education. So or furthering education, if that's even possible in this case. Actually, it always is. Let's talk about education in terms of sustainable development and actually gender empowerment. President Halonen was here back in March, just last month. Really an exemplar figure for the empowerment of women. The country of Finland has just been phenomenal when it comes to the number of women in cabinet positions and in government, etc. What can you tell us about women's empowerment in terms of best practices towards sustainable development?
I mean, if you really want to have sustainable development, if you really want to develop your society, you have to empower all the actors in the society, and then you have to empower the women also. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. If we speak about education, I mean, when we started with the general education for the whole of the population, it was from the beginning for the whole of the population, not just for boys. It always was also for girls. And that has led the basis for women's participation in the society as a whole. And we've seen the results. For example, in the schools, of course, the girls score higher scores in all of the universities, all of the higher education institutions, colleges. The majority of students are girls or young women. So that has been a long case in the fact of life in Finland. For example, 70% of our doctors who are graduating today are women. Okay, so that can be a good and a bad thing, but at least there's an opportunity for women to be part of this phenomenon. Another factor also for women and women's participation in the society, in the working life, was the fact in 50s and 60s, when the economy was growing very rapidly, there was a high demand on labor force. And of course, when the attendance of women still in labor force was much more limited than it is today, in order to increase the labor force, we needed to get the women also to participate in the working life. And in order to do that, you have to organize daycare premises and affordable daycare so that actually both parents can participate in the working life. So that's why nowadays, for example, we provide for all families who have children, they have the right to have the child or children in the daycare centers. And that's a subjective right. You actually have to have that opportunity, which means that you can actually employ all of the resources from the society. That's why, for example, when we speak about employment figures, approximately 70% of adult Finns are in the labor force.
And it's amazing because that cycle generates this higher employment and thereby also still keeping the kids pretty healthy and educated at a very young age, and still, you know, given the care and attention that they need, making for a powerful and amazing country.
Yeah, exactly. Of course, this has to be always the choice. I mean, you can of course choose not to use these services, not to be in the labor force, not to work, if you can do that. But it's always that you have to provide the opportunities. It's not that you can be employed. I mean, you cannot be employed unless you can take care of your children in a safe way.
Absolutely. You know what, let's take a look at the Millennium Development Goals. Not that they're necessarily an issue for Finland, you know, as far as their achievement or just, you know, the living quality in Finland, but really in terms of, in this case, North-South cooperation or triangular cooperation. Can you tell us about some or any initiatives in terms of bilateral relations among UN member states, of how Finland is really trying to help other countries attain Millennium Development Goals, or perhaps any measures within the UN?
Yeah, in our development policy, there are a couple of basic factors. First of is that we try to promote sustainable development everywhere. And the other issues, a guiding principle for us, are the Millennium Development Goals. So we put a lot of emphasis on attaining those goals in our partner countries. We have been long time, more than 50 years in the International Development Cooperation, and we have increased our share in the International Development Cooperation all the time. And a main emphasis, there are several issues where we have been really concentrating. Education is not a surprise, certainly. I mean, education, certainly building and training educators in development countries, that has been one of the cases which we have doing a long time. On the sustainability side, because we have a lot of forest and we have been living out of forest, so we now know a lot of forestry. So we also have been and we still are very strong in promoting sustainable forestry in developing countries.
So let's expand on that. And in terms of climate change, what is Finland doing as far as mechanisms for short-term and long-term planning for a forest, the protection of forests, and of course for climate change mitigation and security of the country? Yeah.
If we speak about forests, as I said, we have been living out of forest. It's the natural resource which we have. But since, I would say, more than 150 years ago, we enacted a law. Whenever you are going to cut any forest, you have to plant at least as many trees as you cut.
How is that regulated? I have to ask you. How is that regulated? How can you ensure lumberjack, you know, walks into how many is it of the forest? You have about 2/3 of Finland, right?
Yeah, it is a lot.
How is that regulated?
It is regulated quite well. I mean, the regulation started early on, and of course, it's much more advanced than it used to be. I mean, today we are cutting more forest than ever before in order to produce paper and similar products. At the same time, we are growing more forest than ever before. So it has been on a sustainable base since long time, more than 150 years, and the tradition is there, and then of course people honor this, but it's also enforced. Most of the forests in Finland are privately owned. So so there's always a private interest also, because I mean the forest owners, of course, they want to cut sometimes and make some money out of that, but they know always that there's going to be a next generation after that, who have to have something for them also. So there has been the initiative to do so.
So Ambassador Viinanen, it sounds like there's a cultural compassion, if you will. There's a cultural ideology that says yes, we're going to produce, yes, we're going to empower ourselves financially, but we're going to give back. Am I correct in hearing what you're saying?
In a way, especially when it comes to forests, yeah, that is true. And it's been a long time. This has never been a contested issue in Finland. Everybody accepts that this is the right way to do, and everybody honors that. And then also there are enforcement methods in place, so that can always can be done.
That's very encouraging.
Concerning other issues in sustainable development, of course, we, like any other developed countries, we are facing certain challenges. I mean, the greenhouse gas emissions, I mean, have been increasing and so on. So there are some short-term plans, for example, that we try to reduce the emissions. We try to introduce even more renewable energy sources in our energy mix. We have them a lot already. For example, 40%, almost 40% of our electricity is produced by renewable sources already. That's hydropower, and also as a byproduct when we produce paper, you know, when it's a very complex chemical process which you have to use, but the byproducts can be used actually to produce energy, especially electricity and so on. So that has made it possible for us to have that mixture. We try to cut down emission even more. There's a government plan that by 2050 the emissions would be cut from the 2001 level by 80%. So this means that we have to address the issues concerning transportation, energy production, and other issues where there are emissions.
Let's cross over just a moment to the G77 and the G20. There are concerns from many G77 members that there isn't enough cooperation between the G77 members and the G20 members. What is your feedback on that?
Depends very much, of course, on the members of the G20. I mean, you have very powerful G77 members in the G20. I mean, India, China, Brazil, South Africa, Indonesia. I mean, there's a lot of players who are players also in the G77. So I mean, are they, if there's a criticism, is the criticism towards these G77 members in the G20 or against whom? I don't know. So I mean, I'm not very familiar with that discussion, but one has to see that G20, of course, is much more representative than G7 or G8.
On the least developed countries conference coming in, LDC4 in Istanbul next month, what are preparations, what are consultation discussions currently about? What's the progress underway so far?
I would have to admit that the progress is too slow so far. I mean, it's been a very difficult negotiation process, as it seems to be always when we are negotiating on the development issues at the UN. I mean, there are a lot of wasted interest, there's a lot of politicizing, there's a lot of politics. Sometimes we diplomats here in New York tend to forget that there's a real world somewhere, and we are hooked up on issues, on words, and what does a certain word mean, and so on. And that's a pity, of course, because we are speaking about the least developed countries, the countries with the most problems, most vulnerabilities, and of course a lot of opportunities also. And it's not just about the countries, it's also about the people who are living in these countries. Many of them living in miserable conditions every day. And I guess that, and I'm sure that we owe to those people to do our best in order to have a program of action which can make a difference in those people's lives.
Ambassador Viinanen, if you could bring a message from Finland to our viewers, what would that be?
The message certainly would be that believe in yourself, aim high, try to do your best every day.
That's perfect. And then for you yourself, Ambassador, what are the key challenges you face as an advocate for your country?
This is a very challenging place to be. I mean, there's so many issues on the table and the agenda of the United Nations. So I mean, just coming in here and seeing all the issues, so you are humbled by that. Then there's so many people, so many brilliant people, and when you have to negotiate with very, very intelligent people, so that's also challenging. So I guess the challenge is at the same time that there's a lot of issues and there are a lot of people, and if you try to influence on those, so you really have to work hard. At the same time, always when something is challenging, it's also very rewarding. So that's probably on the high note, I would say that the challenges are there, but the rewards are much higher than the challenges.
It's been very inspiring.
Thank you very
so
much
for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us here on South News. I'm Afaf Kanja. We'll see you soon.